So Linda and I are teaching to the poisons, the three poisons. And I suggested that topic because the political climate has felt so poisonous to me. And one of the ways it feels poisonous is the amount of greed that's on full display. And so I'm going to teach today to that topic. And I'm going to title this talk, Greed and Satisfaction. So I think that greed masquerades, or maybe better said, offers the promise of satisfaction, the fantasy, the hope, the dream. But according to the thesaurus, actually, it's the opposite. Greed is the antonym for satisfaction. And, maybe one good example of this that probably you've all heard or likely heard, which is people who win big amounts of money in the lottery often don't become happier, rather the opposite. It leads to all kinds of problems. So I think that's a really good example of, that fantasy of winning the lottery. It's almost, it's a cliche. What would you do if you won the lottery? And I think it can evoke the fantasy of satisfaction, but it seems like that's not what happens for many or maybe even most lottery winners. And another way that this is sort of in the common understanding is about this 1% and 99%. And so I went and looked that up, and it turns out that the wealthiest 1% of Americans in 2023 owned 30, and probably it's more in 2025, but this is the statistic I found, owned 30% of the total net worth, which is $43 trillion. And in order to be considered in this top 1%, a household's net worth needs to be at least 13.6 million. So I'm actually befuddled by this reality. What would I do if I had a net worth of 13.6 million? I don't know, but that's not really the fundamental question. The fundamental question, I think, is, would this make my life better? Would I be more satisfied? Well, maybe there's many fundamental questions, huh? Would I do good with this money, or would it just lead to more craving, more dissatisfaction? Of course, this is a question, these questions are for each of us. We don't need to have that kind of, we don't need to be in the 1% to be posing those kinds of questions. Would this thing that I feel desirous for, would it really make my life better? Would I become more satisfied? Or would it lead to more craving and dissatisfaction? I don't expect that to be a clear-cut yes or no answer. It's much more complicated than that. But I think in some ways what I'm beginning to speak to is the middle path. We're not suggesting that you have no desires. We're not suggesting that you go out with a begging bowl and just the robes on your body, although, of course, that is a thing in Buddhism, and that can be seen as a very high ideal. But none of us seem to be taking that path, or we wouldn't be here now. We'd be in a monastery. But the middle path is, we need some desire, but when does it go over the line? When does it become greed? When does it lead to more dissatisfaction? When does it go to the extreme? Too much of a good thing is too much. And again, I'm going for a common example, which is about medications. Many of the medications in your medicine cabinet, if you took too much of them, would become poisonous. And yet they may be very helpful taken in the right dosage. Hopefully, that's why they're in your medicine cabinet. And a great example of this is acetaminophen, Tylenol. And because it turns out it's one of the most common poisonings, and it can actually be deadly when taken in larger doses. But of course, taken at the prescribed dose, it can offer relief. So this example perhaps speaks directly to the issue. We want relief from dukkha. We want relief from pain. But sometimes we look in the wrong places where we're going to get relief. There is no relief, or we look in the right places, but we take it to an extreme, or maybe find some relief, but then the pain gets stronger and it's not enough. So we take more, whatever it may be, more Tylenol, more alcohol, whatever. And maybe the intent is good. Maybe we want to feel better, but after a while it goes in the opposite way. We feel worse. So as I was thinking about all this morning, a term came to mind, a term that's used in Buddhism, though we don't use it often, or I don't know if I've ever said it before, actually, but which is the hungry ghost. And the reason why we don't tend to teach to that concept, or that it's more than a concept to many people, but at any rate, that teaching about the hungry ghost, because is it because it's tied to the concept of rebirth, and we don't teach to the concept of rebirth. Now, mind you, we're not telling you you should or should not believe in it, but we're just saying we don't teach to it. But the image for me has always been potent. I can almost see it in my mind's life. And it's described as a being. And of course, this being's in the afterlife, which again is tied to future lives. But this being has a neck as thin as a needle, and also a huge sort of bloated stomach. And this being is unable to get satiated, no matter what, unable to get satiated. God, that really actually sounds like a grotesque form of suffering. And I think the view goes that they're reborn this way because they've been so greedy in their life on Earth. So I pulled a quote from Tricycle on this, by this Zen teacher, Alex Kakuyo. I'm saying his name wrong. Okay. In Buddhist cosmology, a hungry ghost is a being who's condemned to walk the earth, always eating and never feeling full. This has been the story of my life. Constantly reaching, striving for one more thing. I hunger and I thirst endlessly for something I don't have a name for. Something more fulfilling than money, power, or spiritual attainment. I liked that quote. That's why I pulled it out, because I think it speaks to it. I thirst for something that I don't have a name for. So I think that's sort of the root of it. There is this thirst, this hunger. And again, hunger and thirst are good things. If we didn't have hunger and thirst, we'd die. But something that you just can't get satiated. So I've been giving some kind of traditional teachings on desire and greed and satisfaction. But in reflective meditation, we're not suggesting you get beyond desire and greed. But what we are doing is becoming, hopefully, a bit more wise about them through reflecting upon them. And perhaps get to know a little more which desires actually lead to more satisfaction, what do we really need? Again, this gets to Linda's provisional fourth mark of existence, that we have needs. So we need to go about fulfilling them. So, but when does it lead to more craving, more greed? And maybe even more importantly, become wiser about actually what leads to more sustaining satisfaction. Sometimes it's more subtle. And hopefully some of that satisfaction comes from the fruits of our meditation practice, our time together in Sangha. And of course, we come to know this and hopefully much more from reflecting upon and investigating our actual lived experiences. So I will end the talk there.